So now we are going to start the second panel discussion of today. The discussant will be Professor Harrow again. And we are having, the panel consists of Dr. Nawab and Honorable Professor Dr. Bilas Toprak from Turkey, Mr. Nawab from Singapore. Please.
Thank you and good morning again. This session we will have the same topic, actually on the state and the religion, the struggle for hegemony in defining the right formula. But our speakers are different. Because we have a speaker who speak about India's pluralism and Iranian politics. But for this session we have speakers on Malaysian situation and also from Turkey. The first speaker will be Dr. Nawab Muhammad Usman from S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, University of Singapore, from Singapore. And his title will be No God But God, God with small case G and God with capital God, Defining Islam and Muslimness in Contemporary Malaysia. The second speaker will be Honorable Professor Dr. Bilas Toprak. She is a member of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Republic of Turkey, and her title will be An Islamist Party in Power in a Democratic State, the case of Turkey. Please let me read the CV of the first speaker. Sorry, I haven't got any CV of Professor Muhammad Nawab Muhammad Usman, but I think everybody have a sheet of paper containing many CVs of the speakers. So our speaker is Dr. Muhammad Nawab Muhammad Usman from S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, University of Singapore, from Singapore, and his title will be No God But God, Defining Islam and Muslimness in Contemporary Malaysia. For Professor Usman, the floor is yours.
Very good morning to all. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak on the topic, which is, which I've been researching for some time. I flew in from Malaysia actually, attending the annual meeting of the Islamic Party. So that is going to change, obviously, certain dynamics of Malaysian politics, and I'm going to draw on the experiences and some of my field work in the paper. Now, I thought that I'd like to be cheeky by introducing a title, No God But God. And if you look at the first G, it's a very small G, and the second G, God, is a big G. Now, this is actually related to belief amongst Muslims, that the first belief actually, that there is no God but God. But the issue that I'm going to talk about is over the usage of the word Allah, which is actually what is used to describe God in the Quran, and how that has actually impacted the usage of one particular word has impacted the dynamics of both society and politics within one of the most important Muslim country in the region. Now, I'll first start by introducing the position of Islam in the Malaysian constitution and legal system. Now, many of you obviously would know that Malaysia was under British colonial rule for several decades. And what was interesting was the fact that the British actually left matters of religion and culture in the hands of the Malay rulers. Now, here's an example of a Malay ruler looking very regal and all. And basically this has got to do, their approach to the management of religion has got to do with their own experience in India, where they encountered many problems with the Muslim community, and so they decided not to dabble at all in matters of religion. In theory, of course, there are exceptions to this. And what it did was, it basically strengthened the position of the Sultan or the rulers, as well as the Muslim religious scholars, because prior to this, there was no legislation that actually empowered them in the same way that was the case, because their power was really haphazard. It wasn't structured within the constitution. And upon achieving its independence, Islam was recognized as the religion of the federation. This was interesting because everyone actually agreed, because we have to understand that Malaysia was a multi-religious society even then. You had many non-Muslims. A good more than 45% of the population at that point of time was not Muslim. But yet, interestingly, the debate about Islam being the official religion of the country was not a very contentious debate. Debates surrounding the issues of Malay special rights and privileges, the Malay language, and issues of citizenship actually dominated the discussion at that point of time. And I think many of the non-Muslim leaders at that point of time didn't make too much out of this notion of Islam being the official religion, because there was an Article 11 of the Constitution which protects the freedom of religion. However, as we'll see later, that the issue of Islam being an official religion is something that was highly subjective and was debated at various times and represented in different ways in the course of history. Now, the other issue I think that we have to understand with regards to Malaysia is the fact that it's a federal state, and so each of the state constitutions actually have their own set of religious laws to a certain extent, and they have the right to actually define how they would like laws to be structured. And again, bear in mind that it comes under the purview of the rulers. So the government has, obviously they have some control, but it's a very sort of iffy region of the law. Now, there were various amendments made to the law, and under Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, perhaps the most famous or infamous, depending on how you want to look at him, Prime Minister of the country, there was a drive towards Islamization, essentially. Now, he was not exactly an Islamist himself. Mahathir Mohamad was known to have very secular ideals. Having said that, if I could quote one scholar, Syed Reza Wali Nasir, he said that Mahathir's Islamization served the interests of states which are weak post-colonial states at this very critical juncture in the 1980s. It allowed basically states like Malaysia to survive the challenges of to their authority, and provided them with the ideological tools that allowed them to expand their power and reach and to create greater harmony in state-society relations at a time when society was turning to Islam. Malaysia used the ensuing stability more successfully to pursue economic growth. On the downside, Islamization allowed states to avoid fundamental reforms in their economies, political structures, and policy making as it facilitated the expansion of state power through successful manipulation of ideology rather than the rationalization of structure and working of state institutions. And in this regard, I think the example of Turkey would be a very interesting one in terms of comparison, because Turkey obviously is using Islam in that sense, but also driving economic growth. So I think we can see some parallels, and I think Madam will expand on the point. Now, let me just go through several changes made to the state constitution. In 1982, an amendment was made to the Penal and Criminal Law Act to deal with deviant Islamic teachings. However, it also allows for state interference in the practice, progression, and propagation of non-Muslim religions. So this actually sort of adjusted the position of Islam slightly. In 1983, a more serious law actually was implemented, the codification of Islamic laws. Now, state Muslim laws were effectively revamped through the introduction of a more procedural law. Islamic laws included offences such as apostasy, deviant behavior, and in some cases included fine, imprisonment, and rehabilitation. So they don't actually implement Islamic law, criminal law, in the same way that we understand it to be, in terms of if you steal, you will cut your hand and stuff like that. But they introduce certain new laws. So, for example, if you are caught, drinking alcohol or gambling, or if you are a beautiful Muslim woman taking part in beauty pageants, you can be arrested and you can be fined. At various times, there is the use of the state power to try to control, the society in that sense. Now, in 1988, another amendment was made. It provided more autonomy for the state Sharia courts, the Islamic courts dealing with Muslim personal law issues, where Article 121 provided the High Court, stated that the High Court shall have no jurisdiction in respect of any matter within the jurisdiction of the Sharia court. Now, this changed the game quite a bit. It changed the ground quite a bit, because now what it's saying is that Sharia laws does not come above state laws to a large extent. And the structure and the wording of the laws itself is so controversial that it has become an issue that continues to dominate Malaysian politics. Now, as some of you guys might be aware of, one of the main opposition parties in Malaysia is the Islamic Party of Malaysia, PAS. They have been in power in various states at various points in Malaysian history, and they tried introducing Islamic criminal laws in the states of Kelantan and Terengganu. This was in the 90s and early 2000s. Now, however, they could not enforce the law, because although it was passed in the two state assemblies, because laws that are subjected to both laws are the subject of constitutional challenge, because it is stated in the constitutional law that any law that is going to supersede any criminal laws that are supposed to supersede the limitations set out by the national by the federal constitution will have to be approved by the government. It has to be passed in the Malaysian parliament itself. All right. Now, in the period of 2000, often in the literature we read about the Islamization race between PAS and UMNO. This is basically an aim to try to capture the Muslim ground majority at this point of time, and there were various issues that were being used. So in 2001, Dr. Mahathir made a statement that Malaysia was already an Islamic state, triggering basically a debate that continued for years. Obviously the opposition Islamic Party claimed, well, Malaysia is not an Islamic state, and the government tries to make the case that Malaysia is an Islamic state. Now, there is a problem with this, because it's not as simple as you making a claim. When you make a claim, you start creating an atmosphere where expectations about certain aspects of Islamic law to be implemented, you heighten these expectations. We have to also understand there are state religious bureaucracies where many of the religious scholars share these ideals with members of the opposition parties, and they begin to try to get certain laws implemented. Now, testing the system, in essence, there was a case in 1998. This was a Malay woman, Lina Joy. She basically converted to Christianity in 1998. She got her name changed and was recognized by the court, and she wanted to get her religion changed as well, the religion stated in her identity card. And this resulted in a long drawn process where she challenged the decision. She filed a suit with the High Court in 1999, and after many years of appeals and so on, finally in 2006, the court actually stated clearly that a Muslim person who's born a Muslim person basically cannot convert out of the religion. Now, if you think about it, it's crazy, because if you do not believe in a religion anymore, you can be whatever you want. However, I think it has a lot of implications in terms of constitutional. The constitutional impact has has many implications. Now, this was used as an example for subsequent cases where there was, for example, a Muslim woman who was raised as a Hindu and was married to a Hindu man. She was forced to undergo rehabilitation, and her marriage was annulled. And basically, there were many examples of this. So it is the strength, the iron fist sort of approach to religion that was being implemented at this point in time. Now, the case of Lina Joy basically heightened the religious tension. It led to some radical Muslims leaving a cow head. As you know, for Hindus, the cow is considered a sacred animal. They actually left the head of a cow outside the Hindu temple. Now, under Abdullah Badawi, basically, once again, although he was not an Islamist himself, he was basically very lax in terms of how he dealt with these issues. And because of that, many of the more radical elements within society tried to change, tried to implement more Islamic Islamization of Islamic law. Now, the 2008 election, this was actually a landmark election as far as the Malaysian state was concerned. It was the first time in Malaysian history where the ruling coalition, the Barisan Nasional or the National Front, actually lost their absolute majority. So they actually got less than 2/3 majority. They've always had it throughout Malaysian history. And a large part of it was because, what contributed to the loss was the loss of Malay support at that point of time. Of course, many non-Malays also were against them. And it also led to the loss of 5 states, including 4 Muslim majority states. Now, throughout the election period, in fact, prior to the election period, race and religion already featured very prominently. There was basically the government was under attack. They felt the need to try to defend their position by positioning themselves as the defenders of the Islamic religion and the Malay race. An issue that cropped up at this point of time was this issue, the issue of the word Allah. Now, what was this issue about? Essentially, the Herald, you can see from one of my photos up there. The Herald is basically a weekly Catholic newspaper. They have been published for many years, and they have basically versions of the paper in English, in Malay language, in Tamil, I believe, for many years. However, there was a contention about the usage of the word Allah to describe God in the papers. So suddenly in 2008, in 2007, they were basically told by the Ministry of Home Affairs in Malaysia that they cannot publish the Herald anymore, so because of the usage of the word Allah. But prior to this, actually, this was a very politicized issue because the initial problem started with an editorial in the Herald, which actually supported the opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim in a by-election that he was contesting in. So it started off as a political problem. They found a loophole in the issue with this usage of the word Allah, and they started to take, because they were very worried that the Herald and the Catholic Church was going to sway the non-Muslim or the Christian votes against them. So there were various actors, of course the Catholic Church of Malaysia, United Malaysian National Organization, UMNO, the main constituent party ruling the state, the Islamic Party of Malaysia. Pembela basically was a group of 50 Muslim organizations, more right-wing in nature, that was formed in defense of Malay race and Islamic religion, the religious bureaucracies, and the rulers, because again Islam came under the purview of the rulers. Perkasa was a right-wing, in many countries they would be considered to be a racist organization. You can see over here, basically these are a bunch of Perkasa guys, and if you know Malay, you will see that they basically say we have to ban Christian schools, we have to ban Christian teachers from our national schools and stuff like that. So these are the kind of rhetorics that are often being used by Perkasa. Now, so what happened with this particular case? The Archbishop of Kuala Lumpur at that point of time filed, submitted himself as a plaintiff, and an application was filed against the decision. And in essence, what happened was there were various on the ruling by the Malaysian government on the 27th of 2008. The Herald Editor stated that the ban on the word Allah means that, which means God to non-Muslims, is still in place. So he quoted a letter dated on the 16th, a letter that was actually sent to him later, where they were actually allowed. So there were various mixed signals at that point of time. So on the 31st of December, after various court procedures, the High Court, the Kuala Lumpur High Court, ruled in favor of the Herald, stating that even though Islam is the federal religion of the state, this does not empower the government to prohibit the use of the word Allah. It also found that the word Allah was not exclusive to Muslims. The ruling emphasized that the use of Allah by Christians is protected by the Constitution as long as it is not used to proselytize Muslims. Now, so in essence, the decision resulted in massive protests amongst the Muslims. They saw this as a Christian attempt to try to convert Muslims out of Islam and so on. And so the government asserts that in essence they were going to challenge this decision. So the government appealed against the decision, and there was basically a temporary revoke of the court decision in January 2010. Finally, after various court proceedings, in October 2013, there was a final ban by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal actually rejected rule in favor of the Malaysian government, and basically said that the word Allah is exclusive to Muslims. Now, and to make it worse, what happened? So what we basically see in this particular case was the increasing influence of the Muslim lobby groups and the usage of religion by a government to try to protect its political turf. Now, what are the implications, essentially, of this particular issue? I think there are various implications. The first being ethno-religious chauvinism that we are beginning to see in Malaysian society. The 2013 election that concluded earlier this year has actually resulted in the Malaysian government gaining Malay support while losing the support of the non-Malays at this point of time. The United Malay National Organization gained 8 seats, although its coalition partners actually lost a lot of their seats in Chinese and Indian dominated areas. As such, I think the Malaysian government is now focusing on trying to win Malay votes, or Malay and Muslim votes, and they are willing to essentially use this ethno-religious card for their political end. Now, Islamization at all costs, I think this is another implication of this. There is going to be an Islamization drive. Recently, for example, there was a case in the state of Kelantan. They have revived the discussion about the implementation of Islamic criminal law. This came after Brunei, announced that they're going to have hudud laws, a couple of months back. And suddenly, what was interesting was it wasn't the Islamic Party that came out with a statement. The state religious bureaucrat at that point of time said, oh, now we are ready to implement Islamic law. Bear in mind, the government in the 1990s rejected the decision made by the State Assembly, but now they are saying, you know what, it's not a problem anymore. And this, again, is, is indicative of that shift that is happening as far as political support is concerned. Now, the third, I think, is this issue of defining the place of the non-Muslims in Malaysian society. Now, basically, many Malays feel that right after the 2013 election, the big title that came out from one of the Malay-dominated newspapers, the Malay Daily at the point of time, was what else do the Chinese want? Because the assumption was that the Chinese voted en masse against the government, resulting in a very bad result. And in this particular case, once again, the government wanted to basically show their, the fact that they are in control and they're willing to use state power against the non-Muslims to secure their own political support. Now, tensions have obviously risen among the Muslim and non-Muslim. Then relations have grown worse. Many non-Muslims today feel that they are under siege because of this Islamization drive. Now, one of the interesting things I think that we are beginning to see is the role of the rulers in politics. Right after the court decision, the Sultan of one of the states of Malaysia, the Sultan of Selangor, actually made an announcement that he is going to implement this Allah ban. No one in Selangor, in the state of Selangor, is going to use the word Allah. No non-Muslim is going to use the word Allah in their Bible or whatever other publication, making it very difficult because for the longest time, another group of people, the Sikhs, have used the word Allah in their holy books and so on. And this has an implication because it was a blanket ban. Essentially, all non-Muslims cannot use it. All right. So it's not just a Christian issue or Catholic issue. It is beginning to impinge on the rights of other religions. Now, and the rulers are trying to basically strengthen their position by using this issue for their own to strengthen their political influence. Now, lastly, I think this issue, the issue of the usage of the word Allah, has resulted in the rethinking of what it means when the Constitution states in Malaysian that Islam is the official religion of the Federation of Malaysia. It is now not a simple issue of the state identifying at a very in a loose sense with this notion of religion. It is now, essentially the state supporting an Islamization drive that is likely to have an impact on the laws that are going to be implemented in society, as well as how the larger Muslim society is going to function within Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, the second speaker will be Honorable Professor Dr. Binas Toprak. And I'd like to read her CV. Professor Binas Toprak is currently the representative of Istanbul to the Grand National Assembly of the Republic of Turkey. She is a member of the Republican People's Party, or CPG. With 135 representatives, her party currently holds over 25% of the 550 parliamentary seats, against the biggest opposing bloc in the parliament, against the AK Party. Professor Toprak received her BA degree from Hunter College of the City of New York, CUNY, and her PhD degree from the Graduate Center of CUNY in 1976. She joined the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, and in the same year, where she taught until 2008, having served twice as department chair. She also taught and served as the chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul between 2008 to 2010. She was also a visiting professor for a year each at Minnesota, USA, and Koç Istanbul Universities. In addition to her academic career, she wrote as a columnist for the Turkish daily newspaper Radikal for a brief period before she was elected to the parliament. Professor Toprak is the author of a large selection of articles and 5 books on secularism and political Islam in Turkey, mostly in English. It's very good. She received an honorary degree in Human Letters from St. Olaf College, Minnesota, the President's Distinguished Alumni Award from the Institute of New York, Graduate Center, and most recently, an Outspokenness Award from International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission in New York, IGLHRC, for having initiated a motion in Parliament to demand a parliamentary inquiry to the situation of LGBT individuals in Turkey. Professor Toprak, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me also start by thanking the organizers of this conference, which I think is a very interesting one in terms of making it possible for us to compare the interplay between state and religion in different geographies and in different different religious traditions. I want to start with a comparison, a more theoretical one perhaps, drawing on what we have been talking about since yesterday. And I'll rely in this comparison on a book that was written a long time ago that our friend from India in the morning mentioned. He mentioned the name of the author, Donald Smith, who also wrote about secularism in India. But this book is about politics and religion, the one I'm talking about. And I think one of the first, at least in political science literature, to sort of compare different religious traditions. He makes a distinction between these traditions in terms of historical versus ahistorical religions. That's one categorization. And the second one about religions with a quote-unquote church, a hierarchical structure of the clergy, versus religions that do not have this. And Islam, of course, falls under the category of a historical religion with no church, which I think makes a difference in terms of any comparison between Islam and other religions. Christianity and Judaism, of course, are also historical religions, the three monotheistic religions, compared to others such as Buddhism, which has no claim on history because there's no God to sort of plan the course of history, or Hinduism or other non-monotheistic religions. But what differentiates Islam from both Christianity and Judaism is the fact that it also does not have an ecclesiastical structure, no church, no differentiation between state versus society, between secular law versus religious law, and so on, which makes it very, very difficult, I think, in Muslim countries as far as secularization of the system is concerned, because Islam has a claim on society. It has a claim on how history should move. It has a claim on the divine origins of power and of law and so on. Which I think possibly lies behind this problem of that we face in Muslim societies in terms of the secularization of these societies. So that, in a sense, when I come to the Turkish case, these three concepts that we have for this conference: partners, competitors, aliens. In other words, is there going to be a partnership between the state and religion, a competition, or are they aliens? I would say, I would also add the word enmity. Enmity until very recently, which in recent times, in the last 10 years, thanks to the rule of the AKP, which is an Islamist party in power, is turning into competition. But generally, the struggle for hegemony between the state and Islam has been based on this feeling of enmity on both sides, I think. So talking about inclusion and exclusion, both proved in the Turkish case to be very problematic. In other words, do you include religion in the state structure or do you exclude it? They proved problematic precisely because of what I already said about Islamist theology. The fact that there's no differentiation, let's say, as there is in Christianity, between the domain of Caesar and domain of God. That these two have historically merged and theologically merged. That theologically, in fact, the idea of a secular state is heresy in Islam. The state should be an Islamic state with Islamic rulers and so on, based on Islamic law, the Sharia. So this has, I think, proved to be very difficult in the Turkish case as well. The secularization of Turkey and this tension between the Islamist opposition and the state, the secularization of the state apparatus, has a very long history. It goes back to mid-19th century when the Ottoman Empire began to modernize. And modernization, of course, in the 19th century meant westernization, not only in Turkey but everywhere else, in Russia, in China, in Japan, and so on. And it sort of ripped the sensibilities of the enlightened public, let's say, both the statesmen and scholars and so on, who were in between this notion of how much Western and how much our own basic tradition and so on. So the fight in the 19th century was between the Islamists versus the Westerners, as they were called. Islamists and Westerners agreeing that Western technology and industry should be adopted, but that Westerners were arguing for the adoption of Western institutions as well, because they were saying that it was these institutions that sort of led to the technology and industry of the West that were important in the development of technology and industry in the West, versus the Islamists who were saying, oh no, look at Japan. They kept their traditions, but they advanced in industrialization, which actually isn't true. I've been to Japan, and you know, this concept of the geisha is a touristic concept altogether. There's hardly anything left in Japan that's indigenous culture either, like everywhere else in the world, but that's beside the point. So anyway, with the Republic, the Westerners won. For the Republic, there was only one advanced civilization, and that was Western civilization, and the new Turkish Republic would take its place among Western countries. So Republican secularism was militant secularism. In that sense, it's perhaps close to the experience of ex-socialist countries, Croatia and others in Eastern Europe. Not as militant as those, because the idea was this concept that was mentioned the first day, the privatization of Islam, rather than a complete attack on religion, as I think was the case in both Soviet Russia and other socialist countries in Eastern Europe. So that as long as you did not bring Islam in the public sphere, as long as you were not publicly religious, let's say, or used your religiosity publicly, it was okay. You know, you could pray as much as you wanted to. You could be as pious as you wanted to, but to use religion in the public sphere as an official or as a politician and so on, that was no. In that sense, the Turkish experience was very much like the French experience. In fact, the word is not secularization, the word that we use, but it's laicism from the French experience, especially Third Republic France. If you remember, Third Republic France was established in 1870, lasted until the Nazi occupation of France in 1940, 70 years. Now for 70 years in France, if you were known to be a churchgoer, if, for example, you attended Mass regularly on Sundays, you had to forget about promotions in the French army. And the same was true about taking part in various French cabinets during those 70 years. It was an unstable republic, so that governments changed almost every 3 months. Imagine how many governments they had. But nobody who was a churchgoer was able to enter into any of those cabinets in those 70 years. And indeed, you know, the French premier at the beginning of the First World War made this speech in the parliament saying that for his generation of Frenchmen, the idea that their salvation by God is forever dead. So it was this militant secularism in France, especially Third Republic France, And actually, this business about laicism versus the state in France is still problematic, although to a large extent, I think, in the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, it's much less so than before. So the Turkish experience was very similar, like I said. During the Republic, the Islamists were totally marginalized. They were marginalized politically, they were marginalized socially, they could not enter social status groups. They were marginalized intellectually, so if you wrote on Islamic themes, you had no intellectual prestige at all among the intellectual circles of Republican Turkey. And most likely, they were also probably marginalized economically, especially considering the fact that until 1980, from the very beginning of the Republic, we had import substitution policies. It was after 1980 that Turkey opened up to world markets and to export-oriented growth and so on. But it was import substitution until 1980, which of course means that connections with the government are very important if you are an entrepreneur. So most likely the Islamists were left out of these economic circles as well. And indeed, right now, for example, there is, if Turkish economy has grown, and it has grown to be the 16th largest economy in the world, and it's a fast-growing economy, it's also thanks to the fact that there is an Islamist party in power since 2002, and before that, Islamist parties in coalition governments, which made it possible for a group of entrepreneurs in Anatolia, pious Muslim men, to become billionaires, basically, because they were close to the government. So that, for example, there are now articles about Muslim Islamic, what was it, Islamic Calvinists. One article called them, meaning pious people with conservative lives, but investing in their city and so on, very close to the Puritan Calvinists in Europe and the US. So anyway, this marginalization continued for very long years. Originally, there were rebellions against this republic in the 1920s and 30s. These were suppressed by force, so the Islamic opposition went underground to re-emerge after the transition to democratic politics in 1946. And in 1946, though, it was quote-unquote tamed, no longer engaged in rebellious activity, but chose to work through the party system, supporting political parties on the right. And this went on until early 1970s, when they finally founded their own party. Previously, in 1946 too, there were several Islamist parties founded, but they all closed their doors because they did terrible in elections, which shows that actually the Turkish electorate does not buy the Islamic card alone, unless that card is attached to economic growth, to everyday needs of the electorate, and so on. So the only Islamist party in 1950, after the 1950 elections, for example, was able to get only one person into the parliament and close these doors later on because of electoral defeat. So in the 1970s, they founded their own party, which eventually grew to be a key player in coalition governments of the 1970s. Then there was the 1980 coup, which closed down all political parties, including, of course, the Islamists. A new party was founded, an Islamist party in the 1980s, which gradually grew and grew and grew until it split up in the year 2000 the reformists within the old party finding the Justice and Development Party Erdogan. And they came to power in 2002 elections alone, and they have been in power since then, increasing their votes in every single election, and increasing it to 50% in the last election when I was elected, 2011. Which translates, by the way, in the parliament into 60% of the seats, because there is this electoral barrier that the generals, way back in 1980, put to prevent precisely parties of this type, extremist parties on the right and the left, including Islamist parties, to come to power, a national barrier of 10%. But once, of course, they came to power, they're now unwilling to change that 10%. So with 10% electoral barrier, they have 60% of the votes, which means that there's no way that any opposition party, even if all the three of them, agreed among each other, could overrule any legislation that they want to pass. And it's almost impossible in the parliament to even change a period or a comma in any of the legislation that they bring to the parliament, because they have the votes. And with a strict party discipline where all members of the party will vote as the prime minister wants. Now, what's the problem? I mean, in a way, after 2000, there was a modus vivendi, kind of, friendly, let's say, semi-friendly, considering the past history of this enmity between the state and religion. And that enmity, in a way, meant that large, important power centers in Turkey, such as the army, such as the judiciary, such as mainstream media, such as intellectuals and university professors, and so on, kept a vigil over the secular state for very long years. So that the Islamist opposition was able to maneuver and move only within these constrictions. Now, when they came to power in 2002, Erdogan's party, the AKP, the Justice and Development Party, they did quite well. They had a very liberal program that committed itself to further democratization and liberalization, political liberalization of the system, to sort of lifting all kinds of restrictions on basic rights and liberties, to becoming a member of the European Union, which previous Islamist parties had always rejected, calling the European Union a Western Christian bloc, where Turkey has no place in it. But this party committed itself to joining the European Union, and indeed did get accession talks, the beginning of accession talks in 2005, and was very careful as far as its social policies were concerned, not to sort of anger the military and face the same kind of fate that previous Islamist parties had faced, being closed down either by the judiciary or being subjected to military coups and closed down and so on. So they were careful not to scare the secular public and not to scare the army and the judiciary and so on. But despite that, in 2007, there was an election of the president. Tell me when I have 5 minutes left. Okay. In the 2007 election of the president, whose wife was covered for the very first time. I mean, Erdogan's wife is covered, the prime minister. So by then, Turkey had moved from this militant secularism to accepting an Islamist party in power, and accepting a prime minister with a covered wife. Although the army, for example, refused to go to any of the official receptions that the Prime Minister would give because he had discovered wife. And for years, he held these receptions without his wife. The wife would not attend any official reception whatsoever because she was covered, because the army as well as the judiciary, these are top echelons of the army and the judiciary, refused to attend these receptions. So anyway, but the president, that was it, you know, for too much because a president with a covered wife for the military was too much to take, because the president symbolizes the state, the secular state, and so on. So the military issued, what should I call it, a memorandum declaring its discontent, and very soon the judiciary opened a case against the AKP that it was against the secular principles of the republic and wanted the party to be closed down, just like his predecessors. But this time, Erdogan had appointed a pro-AKP man to be the president of the Constitutional Court, as well as other members of the court were appointed by the AKP government, so that the court did not close it down, decided that it had become a center of anti-secular activity, warned the party, and cut down some of the state subsidies for the party. And then came the military ultimatum, and this time Erdogan refused to go down to it. I mean, all previous prime ministers, as well as leaders of religious parties and so on, have always been terribly scared of a military coup, so that any time that the military generals made a statement, they would go down and sort of back down. This time Erdogan didn't. And I think didn't, knowing very well that yet another coup in 2007 or 8 was almost impossible, given the public attitude against military coups, against military's involvement in politics and so on. And that was the end of the military. He won, 5 minutes left, he won the military, and then started a series of proceedings against the army, accusing them of plotting to overthrow the government. Top generals are now in jail. They're facing, life imprisonment and so on. And obviously the generals within the army now have accepted the idea that they are subject to civilian rule, and that they can no longer interfere. And I think that this notion of yet another military coup is forever gone in Turkey, thank God. And I think that's the best thing that the AKP government has done since 2002. But just when there were hopes that the situation were normalizing, that this century-old enmity between the state and religion, between secular publics and religious publics, would end, and that there would be a modus vivendi, that each side would accept the other, and that people could now live together, accepting differences and so on. And this has happened before. This has happened with other Islamist parties in the past as well. But I won't go into that. Just when we were, a number of people were hopeful that things were getting normalized, Erdogan began a series of moves that sort of again brought all kinds of fears, of the secular public, that Turkey might look like Malaysia. In fact, Malaysian example has been given several times. It used to be Iran, but people have decided that we won't have a revolution, an Islamic revolution, but that we could be like Malaysia. So, you know, there was a lot of talk about the Malaysian example. Not only that, but also this incredible centralization of power in the hands of just one man, the prime minister, especially after he got 50% of the vote, has meant that the nature of democracy in Turkey is changing. I don't know whether some of you have watched it on TV, the Gezi protests in Taksim Square about this park in May, which were brutally suppressed by the government. These were young people protesting against the fact that the government was interfering with their lives, which it was. Prohibition of alcohol, not strict banning of it. But making it very difficult for establishments, especially in Anatolia, but also in parts of Istanbul as well, to sell liquor. His statements, the Prime Minister's statements against alcohol, criminalizing it in the minds of people. Trying to criminalize abortion, given the fact that there is this very powerful women's movement in Turkey, that has been demonstrating ever since, and he had to back down. Interfering with how you're going to give birth, for example, that banning cesarean section, which he couldn't. He talked about banning cesarean section, but the moment he talks about it, the doctors, of course, are afraid now to give birth with cesarean section. Obviously because he wants a larger population, and with cesarean section, women can only give birth to one child and no more. So he decided that he might ban it. He talked about banning the construction of studio homes because this sort of encourages being single. Very recent controversy about student homes, that some of the students, just like everywhere else in the world, do not live in dorms, but then they rent houses, and apparently in some of these houses they rent them in mixed gender places, young male and female students renting the same flat together. And there was a crackdown and a big uproar about it. So the government again says, well, we didn't mean it, but they mean it. And already, you know, some of the governors in small Anatolian towns have gotten the message, so that one such flat, for example, was I mean, they weren't arrested, the students there, but the police went to the door and argued that neighbors had complained and so on. So that, and what's more important is changes in the educational system, which they secured through a new legislation in the parliament, and the declared aim, both by the Prime Minister as well as AKP people, that they're going to raise a religious and conservative generation of people. So altogether, I think what it comes down to, and I'll finish here, maybe, you know, I'll tell the rest of the story later if there are questions. I think altogether, the problem here has to do with the following, as is the case, I think, in most countries, certainly in all, I would say, Muslim countries, but also in some of the Christian countries, as well as perhaps Israel too, you know, with the Judaic tradition. And that is, that has to do with the question of moral behavior, and who's going to decide on one's moral behavior. Is it going to be the individual who will decide on his or on her own as to what his or her moral behavior should be, depending, he or she could base it, of course, on some religious ethic or on some secular ethic, not necessarily religious. But who's going to decide on it? Is it going to be the individual, or is it going to be the community backed by the force of the state? And I think that's precisely the problem. And I think some of the examples that you gave vis-a-vis Malaysia precisely point out to this. I think this is an issue in the Western world as well. I mean, look at the Christian Democrats and the difference between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats or the Greens or other left parties in Europe. Christian Democrats and the far right. Or look at the Republicans and the Tea Party people and other far right groups in the US. In every time the controversy is over some moral issue or another. Abortion, sexual preference, male-female relationships, and so on. Each time these conservative groups, religious groups, want to interfere with individual lives and decide for them what their morality should be like. I think this is the gist of the problem, and I think this is a major, major problem in Muslim context for reasons that I have outlined at the very beginning of my talk. Because for Islam especially, individual behavior, there's no differentiation between individual behavior versus social behavior versus political versus religious. These are all merged, and I think to separate these areas proves to be very, very difficult. So that when you read Islamist literature, it's always about these issues. Oh, the world is coming to an end. Look at the Western world, the corrupt Western world with mini-skirted women and nightclubs and so on. And here we are in our own society, we're emulating them and we're losing our own culture. And look at the way our women began to dress, and look at the way our young people are interacting with each other and living together out of wedlock and so on and so forth. It's always about these issues, and I think in that sense I find the claims of the Islamists to be very, very problematic as far as individual liberties are concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Toprak, for your very informative and also very enlightening and provoking presentation. Because for your information, the AK parties, for some Indonesian political parties, Islamic politics become as a model for Indonesian Islamic political parties. They are. It's just for your information. And also for Partai Islam Bersatu Malaysia, as they have very strong relation with some Indonesian political parties. It's coming from Muslim voters. So actually the issue of
just to comment on it, it's true that they're not as radical as some of the Islamic groups in the rest of the Muslim world. Having lived in the secular setting for so long, because I think this interplay between democracy and Islam over the years have taught both sides to accommodate each other, so that AKP actually does not do anything that would counter the secular legal system of the country. But it's interference in other devious ways that I think is very problematic.
All right, and so also the issue in Malaysia about the Lina Joy case, and also how to define and how to decide the words Allah belong to any religious, to Islam or to other religious groups. Also, quite a big problem in Malaysia. And so it's quite interesting actually about the words Allah or God with small g, God with big G, and also the issue of apostasy and the rights of citizens, right of the other believers in Malaysia. So I recall with our previous session with Professor Abifar from Iran that he mentioned about the nizam, about the order, and also about the haqqun nas, the rights of the people. So how to deal with the right of the people in before the state or before the order of the state is quite a big challenge for all countries in the world. And about the Turkey's situation also very much interesting, but they haven't mentioned. But maybe I like ask you to mention, to share the role of the predecessor of Erdogan, who is Erbakan, right? With his Refah party. What is his role in keeping the balance between Islamism and secularism in Turkey before AKP got the power? Could you please share?
What do you mean, what was his role? I mean, like I said, AKP is a split off from Erbakan's party. Erbakan founded this National Order Party in 1970, which lasted for a year. It was closed down by the Constitutional Court for alleged anti-secular activity. And then a year later, or the same year, he finds the National Salvation Party, which, like I said, did quite well and joined the various coalition governments in the 1970s, but was closed down in by the military in 1980. It wasn't just that party that was closed down. The military closed down, of course, all political parties and banned the names, so that these political parties, you know, sometimes have funny names, like Happiness Party. It became Happiness because you run out of names. It used to be Republicans, Democrats, and then they're closed down by the military, so they have to find, you know, these strange names. So anyhow, Felicity Party, Happiness Party, these are some of the names of the Islamist parties, all of which have been closed down. But anyhow, so Erbakan's party, I think part of the reason why the Islamists did well, of course, rests with Erbakan and his activities as well. And I think this is the case, this has been the case in many parts of the Muslim world, especially in the Middle East, that the Islamists are exceptionally good in terms of grassroots activity. And this is exactly what Erbakan and his party did, and what this party is doing. Grassroots activity, especially in poor areas of big cities. At one time, for example, these poor neighborhoods where working class people live, or even lower classes live in big cities, used to vote for left parties, mostly for my party, Republican People's Party. Especially in the 1970s, when this issue of secularism versus Islam had given way to political divisions between the right and the left. You know, that was the sort of gestalt of that period. Marxism was on the rise, and in political terms, the struggle was between the left and the right. So these working class neighborhoods, the squatter sites of the cities, people living there used to vote for left parties. Gradually, the Islamists took over, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and therefore, in a way, the collapse of Marxist ideas, left ideas in the world, and so on. And with globalization, with free market economy, with the dying down of this utopia, the socialist utopia, the Islamic utopia took over in a way. And 79 Iranian revolution was very important in this change as well, because for the first time, I think, the Muslim world realized that Islam can be a very powerful weapon as far as revolutionary activity is concerned. In Turkey, as well as in other parts of the Muslim world, a lot of leftists, former Marxists, became Islamists. Not because I think they believed in the ideology, but I think they realized that it's through Islam that possibly a revolutionary turnover is likely in the Muslim world. So anyway, grassroots activity, going from door to door, bringing food to the poor, bringing coal so that they can burn it during the winter, taking care of their funerals, making sure that they have somebody sick in the house to find a place in the hospital for that sick person, going to weddings and with a little present. So incredible grassroots activity, and all of a sudden I think all of these covered women that the Republic had looked down upon were organized, and that was Erdogan's idea way back when he won the mayor's position in Istanbul, which was of course very important for his later ascension to the prime minister's office. That was his invention, to use these women who had never gone out of their homes for political activity, and all of a sudden, there was this army of covered women working for the party, going from door to door and doing what I already said. So I think, this is what Hamas did, and other, the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and other places did, I think. So they discovered, I think, the power of grassroots activity. My party is trying to emulate that, but it doesn't work the same way. But Erdogan, of course, Erbakan, of course, that's why the party split up. Yeah. Because Erbakan, he did become prime minister in the 1990s, 1995, but had to resign because of a military ultimatum. And it wasn't necessarily because he violated any legislation, secular legislation of the Republic, but it was his discourse. He was squeezed between followers that he had radicalized through using Islam, and the exigencies of state power once he was the prime minister. For instance, he said that Turkey would definitely get out of the customs union and would annul all kinds of agreements with the European Union because the European Union was a Western club. And of course in power, he did none of that. He was against the military agreements with Israel. He said, we'll cancel them out. He did it, of course. He talked about getting out of the UN and finding a united nation of united Islamic nations, a united Islamic defense organization, a united Islamic common market, and so on. The time is up. Okay. Well, when you ask the question, it's such a long story. So anyway, anyway, it's these views that made it unpopular, basically, and that's why this group split up to form this new party that seemed at first very much at ease with the secular modern world. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Was a tough round.
Yeah.
Even though the time is up, I'm still I'm still fighting. Yeah, thank you. Fighting the floor to raising question. Maybe two to three questions. You are first, second, third.
Isra Sajong, graduate student of political science, University. I'm asking to Mr. Brack. My question is, could you explain that, in your opinion, what is good life and good society for people in Turkey, in your opinion?
Second question.
Okay.
We collect question first. Yes, please.
Wojciech Brzozowski, Warsaw University. And my question will be also for Professor Toprak. and it will be concentrated on the field of the constitutional law, because you mentioned this extremely high electoral threshold, which amounts, as far as I remember, up to 12% or something. 10% at the moment. Yeah, so that reminds me of this famous Strasbourg judgment in the Umar and Sadat versus Turkey case. So my question would be, to keep it brief, how does this electoral system, which can be seen as departing somehow from the democratic standards, in the opinion of many, how does this affect the problems of the electoral representation, democratic representation of political and especially religious interests? Do you see a relation between these issues? Thank you.
Yes, last question.
Yeah, Javier Martinez Torron from Complutense University. Congratulations, my compliments to presenters for the presentations. I have some remarks with regard to Professor Toprak's presentation. I don't deny at all that Islam or some interpretation of Islam create problems. You have expressed them very clearly in your presentation in Turkey with regard to the possible risks for the freedom of people, individuals' freedom, collective freedoms. But at the same time, I have the impression it's difficult to judge a country from the outside because one is never sure what is going on inside the country. But viewed from the outside, I think it might be perhaps not accurate to describe the situation in these terms. The danger for democracy, for freedom, is Islam in Turkey, or Islamist party, especially since the AKP arrived to power, while the secular class in Turkey are the defenders of democracy and freedoms in the country, and they have kept the Kemalist tradition, and thanks to that, Turkey is one of the few democracies in the Islamic world. That might be part of the truth, but perhaps not all the truth. For instance, just to mention a few examples, the anti-Greek Orthodox policies with all the violence implied that occurred in Istanbul in the 1950s with the support or inactivity or perhaps instigation of the government. That was long before the AKP was something, or the Islamist party were something in Turkey. This doesn't sound like defenders of the freedom, of religious freedom of people at all. The Imam Khatib's schools, which are very, they existed long before they started, if I'm not wrong, during the Kemalist tradition. And there are Muslim schools controlled and funded by the state. The system of religious instruction and that they ignore the existence of the Alevis, and they are imposed Islamic instruction in schools all over Turkey. And in order to get exemption from that, you have to prove that you belong to a different religion, not that you don't want religious instruction. You have to prove that you are Christian, you are Jewish, or something else that is non-Muslim, which is the presumption. Or the mirror system.
I didn't get the last point. Was it that you have to prove?
That you belong to a different religion. That was the situation, as far as I have read it in the singing case in Strasbourg. In order to get an exemption from religious instruction in the public school, okay? And the existence of the Diyanet, the Presidency of Religious Affairs, which has existed for decades in Turkey, and if I'm not wrong, it's an office with several thousand, I think it's around 70,000 civil servants. Why on earth a separatist, a country that proclaims to be separatist, like, needs 70,000 civil servants in the Presidency of Religious Affairs? I really don't understand that. And so it looks from the outside world that part of the situation is the desire of the political class in Turkey, secular or not, but also the secular political class, to control religion in the country. And this has been part of the problem, and it still is. And in this context, when you see, for instance, the case, the typical case, the big discussion about the headscarf in public, does it make really any sense to take this symbol so seriously, as if the country is going to collapse or not, depending on women wearing in public the headscarf or not, I don't think it helps very much the cause of the secular class in Turkey, because when you see the impositive policies of the Islamist party in Turkey, perhaps the example they always can provide is that you never allowed our women to behave in public according to their religion, etc., etc. I would like to know your opinion on these issues.
So please, Professor Tucker.
Yes. Good life and good society for people in Turkey, how would they define it? Obviously you can't. I mean, for any society, you can't say Americans imagine good life to be like sort of French, or for any other society. I think there are various definitions for different people. In terms of our topic, I think the good life and good society is very different for Islamists versus, let's say, the secular public. So I don't think I could give a single definition on what that would be. The electoral, I'll come to yours, which is the longest one. The electoral threshold, how does it reflect in terms of democratic representation? In this last election, it wasn't too bad that 80% of the votes that were cast were reflected in the parliament. But in the previous election, for example, a large number of votes were simply discounted in the sense that they did not at all translate into preferred political party taking place within the parliament. In this last election, it was only possible because the Kurdish party got organized enough. I mean, it's a long story as to how they did it, but given the fact that many of their voters don't even know how to read and write, they sort of measured the distance between the Kurdish party and other parties with a string and gave people this string to wall, all kinds of creative things so that they would win. This is a problem, of course. I mean, there's no country as far as I know with a 10% electoral barrier. And this business about justice in representation versus stability, political stability versus political representation, a good combination of these two, of course, is very important. People have been talking about this for years. I think it's Russia that has a very high one, 7%, but 10% is unheard of. It was the generals in 1980, like I said to Putin. Erdogan, of course, won't let it go because it's in his favor, just like other parties in the past since 1980 didn't let it go when they came to power. So, you could blame him for that. But he wants to turn the system into a presidential system, which would be terrible, I think, for Turkey. I can't go into that, the problems of a presidential system for countries like Turkey, but it would mean real concentration of power in the hands of one man. And studies show throughout the world that except for the US, it hardly works anywhere else. In Latin American cases and in other cases, very soon presidential systems turn into dictatorships. In fact, there are some quantitative studies about this. So he says, well, you want to get rid of 10%, let's get rid of 10%, have simple plurality system of elections, but with a presidential system. So, I hope that's not imposed. The real difficult question. First of all, I didn't argue that the secular public was the defender of individual rights. Obviously it wasn't. And that's why I said that, these people were marginalized, that it was the military and the judiciary and so on that were involved in this marginalization. So could not argue that the secular public have always, from time immemorial, have always been in favor of consolidation of democracy and liberal rights and so on. First of all, of course, there are secular publics and secular publics like everywhere else. There are people, of course, among the secular public whom you would call good Democrats and good political liberals and so on. And there are others who are politically conservative, if not religiously conservative. And indeed, when you look at the past governments in Turkey since 1946, actually it has been always, almost always, except for a very brief period in the 1970s, center-right parties, because the Turkish electorate votes for parties on the right, but not extremist parties, center-right parties. So the anti-Greek riots, I mean, it wasn't the Islamists that sort of criticized this. It was people among what you would call the secular groups, intellectuals and university professors and so on, who sort of, later on condemned the anti-Greek riots, and that wasn't religious actually. That had to do with national issues of nationalism between Greece and Turkey, rather than religious issues, Muslim country versus a Christian country business. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the islands in the Aegean and this enmity between Greece and Turkey that goes way back in history and so on. But it wasn't a religious issue. Anyway, obviously, that was something deplorable. So that Istanbul lost almost all of its Greek population after this event in the 1950s, mid-1950s, when not only the Greek population, but also other minority populations who were scared enough, with the events that they too left, including Jews and so on. So that, unfortunately, right now there are very few of them left. But you're right about this. I mean, it cuts both ways, because that was precisely the problem, because the secularism in Turkey, as well as the secular public, was so anti-democratic, constraining the freedoms of the Islamists to live as they wanted to live, because they were so finicky about this whole issue. I mean, you point out that the headscarf, that is the whole system going to collapse because women wear the headscarf. I'll give you even more ridiculous examples of a long controversy in the late 1970s, which went on for 3 months, because Erbakan's party, the neo-Islamist party of that period, was in the coalition government, and with his insistence, beer became to be considered an alcoholic beverage, and therefore subject to a liquor license. Before that, you could buy it anywhere at any age and so on. And with his insistence, it became like any other. And obviously, it has alcohol. If you drink enough of it, you could get drunk. For 3 months, where is the secular republic going? These Islamists. Now it's beer. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. That type of things. So these issues flare up in Turkey. That's what got Erbakan into problem, because he was using these symbols that he's going to build a mosque in Taksim Square. And the secularists are against it, because that's the most cosmopolitan part of the city. That he's going to turn the Hagia Sophia museum into a mosque again. Not that he was able to do it, but it was this discourse that basically got him into trouble. So anyway, you're right about the Imam Hatip schools. Obviously, they were closed down, and by the way, last year with this new educational bill, they reopened. But the problem now is the opposite, because a lot of, for example, the government introduced 2 elective courses in the high school curriculum. They did not exist before. And the argument was that there would be elective courses in arts, in music, in gymnastics and math and so on, as well as 2 courses on the life of the Prophet Muhammad and on the Quran. Now you go to any school in Istanbul and parents are screaming, secular parents, none of these other courses are given, and since a student has to take an elective course, they're now forced to take either the course on the life of the Prophet or the course on the Quran. So, you know, that's the whole point. That's why this issue can never be solved. And Erdogan talked about not only raising a religious and conservative generation, but a spiteful generation, he said. And indeed, they're acting like, you know, they're taking revenge from this secular public that sort of acted against them. The Alevi case is a whole different case. I mean, my party right now is screaming against it. It's true that it's not under this government alone that the Alevi are being persecuted. This goes all the way back to the 16th century, to Yavuz Sultan Selim. This is one of the sultans who almost wiped the Alevi from the Anatolian geography. But it's under this government that the name Yavuz Sultan Selim is given to Alevi neighborhoods. I mean, I saw this in Istanbul on the Asian side when I was doing research, where the Alevi live. On the bus stop, it says Yavuz Sultan Selim stop. This man killed them all, almost wiped them out. And they went to the mayor of that town with 11,000 signatures, and the mayor just, pushed them away, saying nobody in this country can talk against Yavuz Sultan Selim. And now there's going to be a 3rd bridge built over the Bosphorus, and the government, Erdogan's government, and Erdogan himself decided that the bridge is going to be named Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge. As if there are no other sultans, So, the present government, as well as this presidency of religious affairs, argues that the Alevi are Muslims. Well, aren't you Muslims? Go to the mosque. And indeed, one leader of an Alevi group said, oh, you want us to go to the mosque? Fine, but let's warn you that our practices are different from the Sunni practices. For example, we dance while we pray, and we play music, the oud, and it's men and women together and so on, and we even drink wine. So if we can do all of this in the mosque, why not? Let's go to the mosque, which I thought was a great answer, to this question. But it's the government. That's why I asked this question about, whether or not the Indian government, the Indian judiciary could decide on the content of religion, because it's this government that decides what Alevi religion is. Why? You're Muslims, so go to the mosque. Whereas these people for centuries have not been going to the mosque. And therefore the government will not accept their places of worship as places of worship, which is a major issue. And Alevi father took the government. This Islamic instruction, by the way, is something that the military put in the Constitution, 1982 Constitution. I mean, as militant as they were, it was that period of Reagan in the U.S., the 68 generation. They don't recognize any authority, they're fearless of God. So to raise a new generation of people who respect the full of authority, let's use religion business, which was the idea of that period, both in the U.S., I think, the moral majority business, also in Turkey with the military, but it was the military that required that course in the Constitution. And then Alevi father went to the court, lost his case, he went to the Court of Human Rights in Europe, and the court decided against the Turkish government. The government now claims that they changed the content of the obviously. So, all in all, I think you're right. There has been a controversy over the presidency. Originally, it was established in the 1920s to control religion, so that the state would control religion. But in the last 10, 20